I think I can see it everywhere today. I'm like that kid in The Sixth Sense. Because you remember when the Home Secretary, an independent inquiry into allegations of bullying regarding Priti Patel, came back positive. The Prime Minister's own advisor on the Ministerial Code concluded that Priti Patel had broken it as Home Secretary, and Boris Johnson decided to ignore the findings, or at least to not believe them. It's in the Prime Minister's prerogative. So he commissions an independent report, or an independent report is commissioned. He has an independent advisor on the Ministerial Code. That advisor, that inquiry concludes that she bullied people and therefore broke the Ministerial Code. And Boris Johnson chooses to believe otherwise, which is his prerogative. But Meghan Markle today is accused of bullying staff at the palace. They're 2 or 3 years old, these allegations, and the people that were allegedly bullied are not responsible for the allegations being put into the public place today. They've been put into the public place by a bloke who did PR for the RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, in the middle of the financial crisis. That counts as a qualification, apparently, in the world of public relations. So that is a fairly huge double standard, right? And then up in Scotland, the allegation against Nicola Sturgeon is that she's broken the Ministerial Code, and Conservative politicians in England and their countless client journalists are on the march, calling for Nicola Sturgeon's blood because they accuse her of doing something that Priti Patel was found by an independent inquiry of having done. Now, if there is an independent inquiry into Nicola Sturgeon's conduct and it finds that she's broken the Ministerial Code, personally, I think she should resign. I don't want to now get bombarded on social media by people passionately involved in the Scottish independence debate. I think the only way I can say that Priti Patel should have been fired on the spot is by obviously contending that if Nicola Sturgeon is found by independent officers to have breached the Ministerial Code, then her position should become untenable. Now, I don't know when this became controversial or whether it's actually always been like this. I don't think it has. I genuinely don't think that it has always been the case that as a country or as a profession or the political and media establishment, whatever it may be, I just don't think it was always like this. I'm pretty sure that it used to be, and I don't know what changed. But I'm pretty sure we used to be capable of judging an action regardless of who. So that's just wrong. I don't care who did it. It's wrong. Right? And you've got an example with Meghan Markle and Priti Patel. You've got an example with Nicola Sturgeon and Priti Patel. You've got an example with Roy Greenslade and Claire Fox. And there are millions of examples everywhere you look at the moment. So what am I asking you? Well, I'd love you to tell me what changed and when, but I don't know if that's doable. Do you know my moment of revelation on this? And it's quite an odd one, but and actually it's something I never would have understood if it wasn't for Twitter. Because I was and remain, I mean, you don't have to point it out now because he's proved it beyond all reasonable doubt, but I was quite an early a warner of Donald Trump's depravity, not just, of course, the descent into fascistic behaviours and tendencies, culminating in people wearing Auschwitz T-shirts storming the Capitol on his behalf and, of course, at his behest. So early doors, it was obvious whether he was mocking a disabled journalist, whether it was the way he spoke about women, or whether it was the number of allegations of appalling sexual conduct that were levelled at him, that those would be the allegations of illegality. We know that he paid off a porn star shortly after his youngest son was born, and none of this touched the sides with his supporters. It was bizarre. But right at the very beginning, the widower of Joe Cox, who was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist, was reported to have behaved inappropriately with female colleagues in his job. And that was awful. Full stop. The day it was reported, and I'd forgotten about this until I was writing something the other day. The day it was reported, it was one of my earliest, I wasn't that big on Twitter back then, but it was the first time I think that I either got targeted by an algorithm or someone stuck a target on my head. And that because I'd been so outspoken in my condemnation of Donald Trump's depravity, people genuinely believed, I say people, numerous Twitter accounts, who knows whether they're real people or not, numerous Twitter accounts genuinely believed that I had some sort of embarrassment attached to the fact that the widower of a woman murdered by a white supremacist was being accused of bad behaviour at work towards female colleagues. And I still don't understand that. So that means in the minds of, and let's presume they're people, because otherwise we'll be here all day. In the minds of these people, because they had presumably closed their eyes to or waved through all of the evidence of Donald Trump's abject depravity, particularly with regard to women, boasting about sexually assaulting them. This is the bit I don't get. I genuinely don't get. So their man, if you like, was boasting about being a sex offender on tape, and they were still cheering for him. So therefore, when somebody whose wife had been assassinated by a racist was accused of sexual misdemeanors, he would be my man because I'm passionately anti-racist, and therefore I would no doubt be just as hypocritical and despicable as them and somehow seek to excuse his behaviour. I have, even to this day, not come up with a better explanation for this. I genuinely don't. So you sit there defending despicable behaviour because you're a racist and Donald Trump speaks to you, and therefore you think when someone whose wife has been killed by a racist is accused of misconduct, sexual misconduct, you think that would make me a hypocrite because I would now turn around and defend him. And I know it sounds like an odd example, but for me it's the real sort of lens through which I look at all double standards, because it's as if the French have a great phrase for it, about one weight, two measures. So it weighs the same until you put it on a different scale that's calibrated differently. So I look at Dominic Cummings and his behaviour being defended by politicians who, when Nicola Sturgeon was photographed standing up when she should have been sitting down at a wake following the funeral of a friend, they went after Nicola Sturgeon with all their fangs bared, and yet they would stand up in public and say that Dominic Cummings did what any father would do. So I'm genuinely intrigued by this, genuinely intrigued. And I don't think anyone can deny it. I mean, again, for the record, I'm guilty of it myself. You don't want the people that you like or the people that you sit alongside to let you down. But when they do let you down, you should be even angrier than you would be when people who you thought were wrong-uns from the start have behaved in a way that proves they were wrong-uns from the start. That's the bit I don't get. And maybe I've done you a grave disservice. Maybe your comfort with all of the allegations and evidence surrounding Donald Trump's sexual depravity had absolutely nothing to do with his racism or indeed yours. Maybe there's another brilliant explanation as to why Meghan Markle being accused of bullying is the end of the world as we know it in the right-wing media, and Priti Patel being found guilty of bullying is in the right-wing media something that we should all just, nothing to see here, everybody move on. It's nuts, right? And I don't know what I genuinely don't know what the dividing line is.